William Parker stood with quiet dignity as he and his family approached Gate 4, the bright airport lights reflecting off his polished leather shoes. Behind him walked his wife, Margaret, draped in a soft cream cashmere shawl, holding a small gift wrapped in gold paper for her mother's birthday. Their son Ethan, tall for his 13 years and dressed in a crisp navy blazer, walked steadily beside them, while little Lily clutched her mother's hand and peered around with wide, curious eyes. Each of them carried pristine first-class tickets, and the air around them hummed with exhaustion from the early morning rush. Yet they all wore gentle smiles that spoke of anticipation rather than fatigue. At the counter stood Clara Benton, a gate agent whose rigid posture seemed to form a barrier between kindness and duty. She scanned other passengers with a look that suggested she saw herself as an exclusive doorkeeper, her eyes flicking up and down each boarding pass like a strict teacher checking homework. When William offered his passes, Clara's lips tightened into a forced smile. Without even touching the scanner, she said, "You need to move aside," he said politely. "These are first-class tickets." She tilted her head and said, "Economy is boarding at Gate 6. As if she were reciting a script she had memorized with pride. Margaret's lips quivered, but she kept her eyes down so her children would not see her hurt. Ethan's chest rose and fell with unspoken frustration. Lily's lower lip trembled as she squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, "Daddy, why won't she let us through?" Margaret knelt and tucked a stray curl behind Lily's ear and said, "It's okay, sweetheart, we'll wait." But William could feel the heat rising in his cheeks and the pounding of his heart. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached, but his voice stayed calm when he said, "Please, scan our passes." Clara lifted one eyebrow and finally touched the scanner. The green light flashed and beeped. Then she scanned Margaret's ticket, and then Ethan's, and then Lily's. Each time the screen confirmed their seats as valid, Clara looked at the screen one more time and then looked at them and said, "The system must be wrong. Sometimes glitches happen." "You'll have to wait while we confirm," she said as she turned back to her screen without an apology or a glance in their direction. The words hung in the air like a dark storm cloud. The family backed up a few steps but remained in a loose cluster, a united front against an unspoken injustice. Passengers in the queue shifted awkwardly, and some crossed their arms. A businessman pretending to send a text stared at them with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Margaret placed a hand on William's arm and said, "Maybe there is a mistake," he said softly but firmly. "There is nothing to confirm our seats are valid. You scan." Clara folded her arms and leaned forward as if she could intimidate them into silence. "Sir," she said, "you need to step aside so I can finish boarding." William met her gaze and shook his head. "No." Clara's mouth curved downward as though she thought she had won. The color rose in her cheeks and she narrowed her eyes. "Well, if you make this harder than it needs to be, you won't be getting on at all," her words dripping with judgment. In that moment, William drew a slow breath and spoke 5 quiet words. "I will make one phone call." His voice carried across the small crowd that had gathered, neat lines of travelers in business suits and tourists with sagging backpacks. Some passengers glanced up from their phones. Others leaned in, sensing that something bigger was about to break the monotony of a routine boarding procedure. Clara's expression froze between surprise and annoyance. He sputtered, "I'm calling security." William did not flinch. He stepped to the side, pulled out his phone, and dialed without a word. Passengers behind them shifted again, some leaning forward to catch a glimpse of the developing drama. A woman 2 spots back quietly recorded the scene on her phone without raising suspicion. William felt a surge of power, not from anger, but from an unwavering conviction to protect his family. He thought about the countless nights he had worked to save for these tickets, and the pride he instantly felt when Ethan tightened his grip on his hand and said, "Father, I'm proud of you." Clara's lips quivered and her voice softened before she steeled herself again. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to wait while we confirm." She tried to save face, but the look in William's eyes told her she was outmatched. He held out one hand. Margaret nodded to their children, and they stepped back in solidarity. Clara hesitated, then picked up her radio and said impatiently, "Delay boarding at Gate 4. William watched as she turned to her monitor, then glanced back at the family standing calm and resolute. The boarding line's anxious chatter grew louder, but he maintained his composed stance. Even as his heart pounded, he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose his temper. He stood tall like the protective father he was, every inch the picture of quiet dignity and determination. Margaret reached for William's hand and squeezed it gently as their children looked up at their dad with trusting eyes. William lifted Lily's hand and ruffled Ethan's hair. They would get on that plane and they would honor the grandmother's birthday the way they always planned, and he knew that this moment of firm resolve would be something Lily and Ethan remembered long after they found their seats. They did not raise their voices, they did not shout or make a scene. They simply stood together and let the world bear witness to their strength. In that telling moment, Clara Benton realized that her prejudice was no match for William Parker's steadfast belief in his family's right to dignity. And while she didn't yet know who had been on the other end of that phone call, William felt certain that real power is not in authority alone, but in the courage to stand up for what is right without letting anger rule the day. William Parker simply nodded when the standby flight attendant moved in to replace Clara at the gate desk. Clara's lips parted in protest, but she caught sight of passengers watching, their phones raised just out of view, murmurs rippling through the line like a sudden breeze. Heat crept up her neck. She said nothing else. Instead, she shuffled back and slid into the empty crew seat near the far wall, shoulders hunched as though she might shrink into the vinyl cushion. A few minutes later, Rachel Monroe crossed the jet bridge to the Parker family again. She lowered her head and spoke softly. "If there is anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." William gave a small, polite nod. "You have already done more than enough," he said quietly. Rachel's shoulders eased. She offered a single smile and backed away, her steps light but her heart racing. As the last passengers filed past, the cabin took on a new atmosphere. People moved more carefully, aware that something remarkable had just happened at Gate 4. A couple in row 3 exchanged glances, their eyes flicking toward the front row. Several kept their voices low, as though speaking too loudly might undo what they had witnessed. And somewhere in the middle of that hush, a message lit up on Rachel's tablet. A direct message from corporate operations appeared in bold letters. "Expect contact from executive office." In the jump seat at the rear, Clara sat frozen, arms locked across her chest. Every few seconds she caught a sideways glance from a passenger or heard a muffled laugh from someone passing by. One man even muttered under his breath, "Still got your badge, huh?" Clara forced her gaze forward and gripped the edges of her seat. Her mind whirled. Why did a single phone call stop boarding? Who wielded that kind of power? A call cannot ground a plane unless it comes from someone. Her stomach sank as the realization settled in. Up in the cockpit, Captain Mitchell tapped a code into his radio. The response came almost immediately, not from the usual dispatch center, but from a calm, deliberate voice. "This is Martin Reeves, Chief of Airline Strategy. We understand there are 4 passengers seated in Alpha Row 1, please confirmed." Mitchell's voice was steady. "Confirmed," he replied. "A family of 4, all seated and settled. Issue reported from Gate 4. Reeves did not raise his tone. "It does not need raising. Maintain current flight plan. Upon landing, retain all crew on board. Do not release anyone until directed. Ground response team will be waiting." "And Captain?" "Yes, sir. Advise your lead flight attendant to remain alert. The person who placed that call is not just anyone. He is a major shareholder and the man who signed our last merger deal. His name is William Parker." The line went silent on Mitchell's end as he stared out the windshield at the pale blue sky. Then, he understood everything. Back in first class, the Parker family sat as though they were merely finishing a peaceful morning ride. William leaned back with one ankle crossed over the other knee, gaze fixed on the soft overhead lights. Margaret tucked a blanket over Lily's small frame, brushing her daughter's hair back as the girl's eyes fluttered. Ethan held his book open, but had not turned a page in 20 minutes. They were calm because they knew exactly how everything would unfold. Rachel returned to her service duties, but her hands trembled slightly every time she passed the Parker family. She offered water or a small snack, but her voice wavered. Every time she left their row, she pressed her lips together and exhaled as if clutching her chest. In the rear, Clara's legs bounced endlessly. She tried to compose herself, but the cabin crew no longer sought her input. No one asked her opinion. She was invisible except for the constant burn of shame and judgment pressing at her from all sides. Finally, she rose and crept toward Rachel at the galley. "I need to speak to the captain," she whispered. Rachel did not flinch. "You are not allowed on the flight deck," she said firmly. Clara's eyes darted around the cabin, then locked on Rachel's face. "This is serious," Clara hissed. "I need to explain what happened before this is blown out of—" Rachel's voice dropped lower. "It has already blown out." Clara froze. Rachel pressed on. "Do you even know who that man is?" Clara did not answer. "He is the reason we are all getting paid next month," she said quietly. "His signature is on every fleet expansion, and you stopped him and his family from boarding his own airline." Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. She sank back against the bulkhead and stared at the carpet. The quiet that followed was so heavy it felt like lead on her chest. Back in the cockpit, Captain Mitchell sat in silence, eyes on the horizon but mind racing through every second of the morning. He had never been ordered to detain crew after landing. That only happened for legal violations or top-tier internal matters. This one would not be swept under the rug. His tablet chimed again. "Prepare incident statement," read the second message. "Internal Affairs will conduct interviews upon arrival. All communications to be logged." Mitchell took a slow breath and exhaled. The real turbulence had hardly begun. Row after row, passengers settled, some whispering about what they had seen at the gate, others simply glancing toward the front. No one asked for extra pillows or a glass of wine. The cabin's hush was not awkward but deliberate. William Parker closed his eyes briefly, resting his head against the leather headrest. Margaret watched clouds drift past the window and ran her thumb gently along Lily's hand. Ethan finally turned a page, but his expression remained unreadable. Rachel emerged from the galley carrying a tray of warmed towels. She paused at the Parker family and bent toward William. "If there is anything you need at all, please let me know." He opened his eyes and met her gaze. "You have been very kind," she said softly. "That is enough." Rachel gave a small nod and moved on, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Clara watched it all from the rear crew area, legs trembling and arms wrapped around herself. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The humiliation was total. She had judged a family by the color of their skin and nearly ruined their day. Instead, they had shown dignity and grace that neither policy nor prejudice could shake. As the engines hummed and the horizon widened before them, the Parker family remained the picture of quiet strength. They had not raised their voices, they had not created a scene. Yet, their simple, steadfast stance had delivered a reckoning far more powerful than anger or revenge. They had let integrity speak for them, and in doing so, they forced the airline to bend to justice rather than the other way around. Clara sat alone on a stool, her uniform feeling like a costume she had been forced into. She remembered the pride she once felt as she corrected staff uniforms or scolded junior attendants for a misplaced napkin. Now those same colleagues passed by without a glance, their expressions a mix of pity and satisfaction. The silence from leadership had cut deeper than any harsh word. She tried to steady her breathing, but the air tasted wrong, as though she no longer belonged to this world. Up front, Captain Mitchell's calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts and ensure all tray tables are in their upright position. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." To most passengers it was routine, but for Clara, The seatbelt sign felt like a countdown to her final judgment. William Parker sat in 1 Alpha with the same serene composure he had shown at the gate. His gaze followed the captain's announcement with polite attention. Margaret tucked the blanket more snugly around Lily and gave her daughter's hand a reassuring squeeze. Ethan finally closed his book but did not look at his father. He seemed to be listening rather than reading. In the galley, Rachel approached Clara carrying a sealed envelope. "This came down from the captain," she said in a tone that held no comfort. "They are waiting for you when we land. Instructions are inside." Clara's fingers trembled as she took it. She did not open the envelope because she already knew what it contained: orders for her removal, and a stern directive that she not speak to anyone about the incident. Rachel looked at her, then added, "There was a time you were one of the best on this crew." Clara blinked in surprise. Rachel's voice stayed gentle but firm. "You knew the rulebook better than anyone, but somewhere along the way you forgot that rules protect people, not judge them." With that, Rachel turned and left Clara alone again. Back in first class, William leaned toward Margaret and asked quietly, "Do you think she understands now?" Margaret looked at him, then at Lily asleep in her arms. She shook her head softly. He did not need to raise his voice. The lesson was carried in that quiet moment more powerfully than any outburst could convey. Clara gripped the envelope in her lap, her knuckles white. The weight of it matched the weight in her chest. Her future had been sealed the moment she refused to treat a family with respect. She tried to pray silently for mercy, but all she could feel was the pounding of her heart and the echo of her own voice telling her she no longer belonged here. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud that felt like a lightning strike. Clara's stomach lurched as applause rippled through the cabin, polite but hollow. Passengers began to gather their belongings, but their eyes turned instinctively toward first class and toward the galley where Clara still sat. No one rushed. They filed forward in quiet rows, many glancing back at Clara as if she were a cautionary tale come to life. Clara stood alone in the terminal, the aisle behind her empty except for her escorts. The roar of the airport felt distant as she realized her career had ended here. Every passenger on that flight had just witnessed her final performance, and none of them would forget. The jet bridge door opened and there they stood, 2 security officers in crisp black uniforms with silver trim flanking a woman in a sleek gray business suit. Her name tag read Nora Fielding, Corporate Affairs. Her presence was final. The quiet click of her heels against the flooring sounded like a verdict echoing through the cabin. Rachel Monroe stepped aside with a polite nod as Nora entered. Captain Mitchell hovered behind her, his posture rigid but respectful. Nora made quick eye contact with each of them, then she turned to Clara Benton. "Ms. Benton," she said in a voice as smooth as polished steel, "please collect your personal items and follow us. You will be escorted directly to the administrative office." Clara rose slowly, her hands trembling around the travel bag Rachel handed her. She looked around one last time at the passengers seated in neat rows, the same passengers she had once judged as less than first class. She saw pity in some eyes, satisfaction in others, and judgment in too many. She swallowed and stepped forward. When she reached the doorway, the 2 security officers stepped aside and Nora stopped. Clara clutched her bag like it might slip from her fingers. Nora's mouth did not curve into a smile, but her eyes held something almost like pity. "I hope this teaches you more than it costs you," she said softly. Clara nodded without answering. She stepped off the aircraft and into a narrow corridor lined with glass walls and the low murmur of other travelers beyond. The jet bridge door closed behind her with a thud that felt like a full stop in her mind. She realized this was no longer an airport in her world, but a stage for her final act. The 2 officers closed in politely and Nora led the way through silent hallways. Clara's uniform felt foreign against her skin. She remembered the crisp, starched shirt she once inspected and the pride she took in enforcing every wrinkle. Now every thread of that uniform mocked her. Nora's tone was softer now. They showed restraint. They did not yell or threaten. They made a single phone call, and that call reminded everyone how powerful quiet dignity can be. Clara sat back in the chair, her signature weighed down on her chest like a stone. She realized in that moment that she had been judged not only for her mistake, but for the prejudice behind it. Loud does not equal strength, he had shown them. Position does not equal power, and silence, when held with truth, can change everything. Clara grasped the bin to her chest, her hands trembling. The terminal beyond the glass hummed with life. Travelers wheeling suitcases, families laughing, boarding calls echoing. It was just another day at the airport, but for Clara Benton, it was the last day of her career. She stepped through the back door into the crowded terminal, shielded by the security officers from the curious stares. She moved like a ghost among the living. The roar of announcements sounded distant as she realized her world had collapsed with a single phone call. Outside the gate, Rachel returned to her duties, but she paused as Clara passed by. Anaya nodded toward her in silent solidarity. Clara gave a slight nod in return, though her heart was breaking. She remembered the one time Rachel had offered gentle comfort after her daughter's birth, when Clara had been kind to a frantic mother. Now that kindness was rubble beneath her feet. And in that silence, her greatest lesson had been written into her soul. Clara Benton's breath caught as Nora Fielding's words sank in. Red level flagged, Nora said calmly, "That means you're not eligible for rehire in this industry. 12 years of service reduced to a permanent black mark." Clara felt her legs give way. She sank onto a bench in the corner, clutching the plastic bin of her belongings as though it might shield her from reality. For years, Clara had prided herself on her sharp eye and firm hand. She had trained new hires in perfect uniform standards. She had memorized every procedure manual. She had corrected passengers for the smallest infractions. Now she realized she had mistaken pride for professionalism. Her assumptions had become weapons. She had judged a family by their appearance and watched them pay the price. She stared at the bin containing spare uniforms, her cabin boss mug, her badge pouch. Each item felt like a relic from someone else's life. 12 years of flights, thousands of hours in the air, all distilled into this moment of disgrace. Clara's mind raced for excuses, but found none. Any defense she tried crumbled before it could form. William Parker's calm voice echoed in her head. "I will make one phone call." Her phone buzzed against her thigh. For one wild second, she hoped it might be management offering mercy. She pulled it out. The caller ID read Linda, a former colleague she hadn't spoken to in more than a year. Clara's pulse quickened. She answered. "Hello?" A hesitant voice replied. "I heard. I saw the footage." Clara's heart sank. "It's not what it looks like," she blurted. "I didn't mean it the way they're making it sound." There was a pause. Linda's voice came back clipped. "Clara, they didn't say anything. That's the problem. You did the damage before anyone spoke." Then the line went dead. Clara stared at the black screen as though it held answers she could read. Nothing appeared but the wallpaper, an image she had set when her daughter was born. She set the phone down and exhaled a shuddering breath. For the first time in years, there were no defenses left. No policy handbook to quote, no crew roster to hide behind. She was utterly alone. She rose and followed Nora out of the room. The two officers flanked her in silence until they reached the exit to the employee parking structure. Outside, the harsh daylight hit Clara like a spotlight. She blinked against it. The sky felt indifferent. She walked toward her car, past rows of vehicles filled with strangers who had no idea the storm that had just broken. Each step felt heavier than the last. She slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and sat gripping the wheel. The world hummed on beyond her windows, yet she felt entirely cut off. Meanwhile, William Parker and his family had departed at the terminal's gate, stepping into a sleek black SUV waiting to carry them home. William paused for a moment at the passenger door. He glanced back at the empty aircraft door behind him as though paying silent homage to the lesson it had delivered. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a slow smile. His children sat quietly in the back seat, still holding the gold-wrapped gift for their grandmother. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. In Parker's calm confidence, there was no gloating. He had not screamed or threatened. He had not demanded apologies or spectacle. His single phone call had set in motion a reckoning far more powerful than anger ever could be. As the SUV eased away from the terminal, William thought of Clara Benton and the crack in her once impenetrable armor. He hoped she would learn from this, though he knew he no longer held that power. Back in her car, Clara sat parked long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the empty asphalt. She still could not bring herself to start the engine. She turned the phone in her hand and stared at a voicemail icon. 10 missed calls from HR, 2 from legal, 1 from her union rep, each call unanswered. She wiped her eyes and exhaled slowly, and somewhere in the hush of her solitude she heard again the echo of William Parker's quiet strength. It was a lesson learned at the highest price. But power used with empathy rises above any uniform. And Clara Benton, stripped of everything, now had the chance to begin anew, not as the flight attendant she once was, but as someone who finally understood what true respect really means. Clara Benton's phone buzzed again, this time with an official statement from the airline. She opened the email and read every word as if it were a sentence carved into stone. "We do not tolerate behavior that violates the values of inclusivity and respect," the message began. "This incident is under full review, and immediate steps have already been taken in accordance with company policy. We extend our deepest apologies to the Parker family. They didn't need to name him William Parker. They all knew who had been wronged." She scrolled down to the attached video clip, a passenger's shaky but unmistakable recording of her own voice dismissing the Parkers. She heard herself say, "Stand aside," while sounding every bit the tyrant she had become. There was little doubt in the children's eyes, the younger daughter clutching her mother's hand. Then William Parker, calm and composed, stepping aside and quietly saying, "If you're sure about this, I'll make one call." The comments below were merciless, but she couldn't blame them. For years, Clara had believed her 12 years of service entitled her to absolute authority. She thought seniority meant certainty and experience meant infallibility. Now she saw how easily pride can masquerade as professionalism. Without humility, policy is just a tool to demean. She thought back to all the times she had instructed families to wait for rebooking passengers whose only offense was speaking with an accent or dressing casually in business class. She wondered how many had gone home feeling less than human. Clara stared at the seat next to her where her cabin boss mug sat untouched. She picked it up, read the bold lettering, and felt anger flare, before she realized that flaring anger was exactly what had betrayed her. She stepped out of the car, her uniform jacket still slung over the seat, and dropped that mug into the nearest trash bin. The porcelain shattered, and the clang rolled down the metal sides like the echo of her own final downfall. The cold night air bit at her cheeks as she looked up at the blinking runway lights overhead. Somewhere up there, a flight attendant was guiding another family to their seats on another plane. Maybe that attendant would pause before making assumptions. Maybe someone would see a mother's worry or a child's hope instead of a challenge to their authority. That slim chance felt like a sliver of hope in her darkness. Morning came with zero sleep and a silent phone resting next to her bed. Her uniform hung on a doorknob, crisp but empty of meaning. The airline had already deactivated her email and employee access. She wandered through her apartment looking at framed photos of crew dinners and graduation ceremonies and saw a stranger in every smiling face. The memories she once treasured now felt hostage to a woman she no longer recognized. She paused at a photo from her 5th year, a uniformed Clara standing proudly beside a captain on the tarmac. Back then, she thought she had arrived at the top of her career. Now she realized all she had built could crumble in seconds. 12 years and thousands of flights reduced to a single viral moment. She poured herself a cup of coffee but could not swallow a drop, her throat dry with shame. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she opened a blank document, then typed, "To the Parker family," before pausing. She wrote, "I did not see you as people in need of kindness, but as an inconvenience in my day." She told them she was wrong and deserved her fate. She praised William Parker's quiet dignity, his unwavering calm, his choice to seek justice without drama. Then, she saved the draft without sending it, knowing some apologies are meant only for the heart. Clara closed the laptop and let the silence settle around her. She thought of the way William Parker had simply stood his ground. He didn't shout or wave his checkbook. He used one phone call like a scalpel cutting through pride and prejudice. His single act forced an apology from the highest level and changed her life forever. In the weeks that followed, airports hummed with their usual rhythm. Passengers queued at security doors, swung open, flights departed as they always had. Yet somewhere in every gate agent's hands there was now a flicker of uncertainty, a moment of pause before a decision. And for Clara Benton, stripped of everything but hard-earned humility, the greatest hope was that her fall might teach someone else the cost of judging before understanding. As the screen faded to black, William Parker's voice returned one last time. He reminded us that true strength isn't measured in volume but in conviction. When Clara Benton refused to scan his family's first-class tickets, she wielded policy like a weapon. Yet with a single quiet phone call, he brought her authority crashing down, exposing prejudice that hid behind uniform and seniority. In the days that followed, Clara faced public censure, lost her badge, her career, and the respect of colleagues who once followed her commands. Meanwhile, the Parker family, Margaret, Lily, and Ethan, returned home not just with their grandmother's birthday gift, but with the knowledge that dignity defended boldly, even silently, can reshape an entire culture. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below sharing what quiet courage means in your life. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another powerful tale of justice served without anger. We'll see you next time with more stories that remind us that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right every passenger, every person deserves.